Welcome back to another episode of Package Your Genius. And this one is a special treat. We've got a special guest who is going to be participating in another laser coaching session with me here on the podcast and video. And I'm excited to talk to her today about her personal branding challenges, which she'll tell you a little bit more about. But Veronica Womack, welcome to Package Your Genius.
Hi, thank you for having me, Amanda.
Absolutely. So tell the listeners and the viewers who you are, what you do, where you live and work, and kind of what you have going on as it relates to your personal branding career at the very moment.
Okay, so my name is Veronica Womack, and I am a researcher at Northwestern University, and I'm a social psychologist. So I'm based in Chicago, and my branding challenge, or what I'm trying to do now, is really begin to brand myself as a mindfulness expert, as well as a diversity and inclusion and consultant, specifically for the retention of Black women in corporate and academic settings. And anything else right now?
Awesome. So you are ready to start talking about wellness. And why would you say that focus area is an area of interest to you? And why are you so passionate about kind of wellness for women, especially women of color?
Yeah. For me, I think about some of the health conditions that we have in the Black community, specifically with Black women, and a lot of them are stress related. So whether that's cardiovascular disease or hypertension, sometimes we get diabetes because we're eating certain foods or not exercising enough, in a way to kind of cope with these stressors that are affiliated with discrimination, sometimes racism, sexism. Some of those are downers, but when we're just trying to deal with these issues, we may not recognize that we are internalizing some of the outward influences, and how that sometimes can backfire in terms of our health. And so I think, I would just like to continue this wave of people just becoming really aware of what their needs are, what their environment is, and how to kind of input a slight sense of control, so you don't just feel like you're being ran by some of the elements that are around you.
That's really interesting, because I don't think I ever thought about the effects of racism and sexism, and just, power struggles on your mental health. Like, I think it's one of those things that it's like this whole other layer of existence that is over, a person when you're a woman or a minority, and you're operating in spaces where you're not necessarily the majority. And so I think that's interesting, but I never thought that there were ways to actually cope. Like, I never thought about the stress being specific to that, and needing ways to cope with that. So have you been studying this for a while, or is this, an area of research for you? How did you jump into it?
Yeah. I've been studying wellness within the African American community for quite some time. I initially began my master's as well as my dissertation at Howard University. Go Bison!
Oh, thank you.
Yes. Because you're in DC, right?
I went to Howard. Yeah.
Oh, hey.
Yay.
Okay. So I've studied the psychosocial factors of stress among African Americans, and I've been doing that for about 10 years under the idea of social psychology. So what is it about discrimination or religiosity or optimism that could possibly influence whether or not you perceive a situation as stressful, and therefore the coping strategies that you decide to utilize to deal with it. And then once I got my PhD, I continued on at Northwestern for my postdoc, where I was able to look specifically at the health behaviors associated with stress. So with that, I was able to publish research about the association between discrimination and sedentary behavior, and seeing kind of racial differences in that realm. So I've been doing it for a while, a while maybe being like about 7 years, but now I kind of want to branch out and kind of have it be less, okay, I'm doing this on behalf of a particular university, and more so like, no, this is me presenting it.
So you've been at Howard, you're at Northwestern, now you're at the medical school
Yep.
there, doing kind of the medical research. So you clearly have been in school for a while.
Yes, or affiliated with academia.
Yeah, in academia. And so now you're ready to take all that you've learned and studied and researched and kind of come up with and start to build a brand for Veronica, but specifically around how women of color, is this, tell me if I get it wrong, how
women of color, but I'm aware that, you know, Black women we have unique stressors compared to other people. So I like to keep it specific. I know
so Black women. Okay. So how Black women can begin to implement wellness strategies to cope with the stress.
Right. And also I wouldn't say begin, because I think that we're already doing things and we're already health conscious, but I just want to kind of bring a bit more awareness to that, as well as so that you can kind of know what you're doing that's helpful, that's healthy for you, so you could share it with other people. Like, I'm definitely not about like this deficit based approach, like let me give you something that you don't already have. I feel like we're kind of full and complete coming in, and I really want to kind of ride off of that strength based type of mindset.
So tell me what you've been doing in terms of getting the word out about who you are and what you know. What have you, where are we in you know, the phase of your brand?
Yeah. So I've been writing, well, I've had like an annual, and that's not often enough, like op-ed that I've tried to get out in like a mainstream type of publication. And I often like use that as like my voice to merge my academic side with the research, but then also like bring in a bit of activism. I've completely been influenced by the Black Lives Matter movement. And it's like, okay, well, if we just kind of keep this information in research journals that aren't accessible to other people, or we just don't talk, we kind of have this public voice, then we're getting all this education and we're not able to necessarily reach the people who we decided to go into this career for. So I've been doing it through op-eds. I've also developed a website with my colleagues called www.beneaththefacade.org, in which we created that to be a digital psychosocial resource for Black women who feel like they're dealing with gendered racism or stereotypical expectations in the workplace. And so we just we summarize psychology journals about coping strategies that Black women have used, and then we kind of put it in lay terms so that everybody can read and understand it, and also kind of recognize that you're not the only one. Sometimes when we feel like we're the only ones going through something, we can try to normalize. Well, you can normalize the experience when you see other people are going through it, but then it might be this idea of something's wrong with me. It's like, well, something could be wrong with you. And, you know, like we could work on that, but there are also just some systematic or systemic things that are going on that you really need to be aware of and try not to internalize or even feel like it's something that you can fight, like, oh, if I keep on working, it's like, well, that could be a way to work around that. But then we also know of the concept called like John Henryism, which is this idea of you can fight racism and sexism if you just work, go. But that also that kind of type A personality type against something that you can't necessarily individually beat can lead to things like, you know, cardiovascular disease and hypertension. So it's like, okay, how can you bring awareness to your situation, know what you can and can't change, but also still recognize like how just the importance of being your authentic self and prioritizing self-care. So that was a lot going on. So maybe you can help me with that, branding, bring that down, put that concise.
Well, it's one thing I would say though, is sounds like you're in a really great spot. I would say you're about halfway through well, I can't say halfway because I don't know about the other pieces, but when I sit down to work with someone and it's like, okay, well, how can we position you and get you out there? The first thing we need to do is really excavate what they know and what information they have to share.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that, and that's actually the hardest part, right? Like identifying the expertise, really packaging that up, getting clear on the message that you want to share with the world and some of your philosophy, and kind of what is your thought leadership. And I love that you are so in touch with it. And it sounds like you rattled off probably about 10 op-ed articles or potential blog posts or podcasts and pieces of content. So you're very in touch with your message from a content development standpoint.
Okay.
It just sounds like you haven't done the work of pushing it out there. So you've got this website.
Yeah.
You've already done that, right?
That like 12 people know about.
What now?
I said that like 12 people know about. It's like, right. It's so all there. It's like,
but let's not diminish it yet, because that is a piece of becoming visible. That is a step of shipping, right? Actually sitting down, deciding what your ideas are, deciding on the URL, setting it up, putting the content on there. Yeah. But it sounds like, so you know what you have to share, and you know what you want people to know. You even know what to call it. You have a name for this site. Why are you not telling everybody about it? What's going on?
I'm shy, Amanda. Like, I don't want to just talk about myself over and over, but I mean, and I think that that's something I have to push against. And a little earlier, we were, during the pre-interview, I mentioned that it's hard to kind of just break out of this student type of mindset. And, I was in undergrad and grad school for like pretty much all of my 20s. Yeah. And it's this idea of like, we don't really get taught to do like self-promotion, or even if you do, it's like, oh, wow, now you're into pop psychology. No, you need to be about the science, get in the books and, stray away from like the cameras on some levels. But
so you're in that, you're in the place of being a student who needs to step out and be the teacher. And I talked about this recently in an article on how it's cyclical, as I was telling you earlier, from student to teacher to student to teacher. It's a cyclical process. There are going to be phases in your life where you need to be learning as much as possible. You need to be studying and doing research and gathering information and kind of pulling everything together so that you can really crystallize your ideas and have something solid to share. But there comes a time when you've gathered everything you can gather. Yeah. And I use the analogy as it being like a sponge, right? So as you're a student and you're learning, you're soaking things up. But what happens when a sponge becomes saturated with water? Like until you squeeze it out, you can't soak anything else up. So I think you're at the point where you need to squeeze out. And by the squeezing out is delivering all of this great information and knowledge and theories and ideas and strategies, giving that back to people.
You are good, girl. Go ahead. Okay.
But giving it back to people because you're at the point of saturation. You can't keep taking things in. Now you need to get it out. And so I think that, you're not alone in that many of us get trapped in either one or the other place. Like it can happen with teachers as well. You feel like you're the person who's supposed to be sharing. And so you never stop to ask questions and learn about something that you don't know about. Right. So there's going to come a time when you'll need to become the student again, but for something else. Right. But right now, it's time for you to take all that you've done and begin to teach it. So you mentioned that you're shy, which, okay.
But it's all like, I can rock a karaoke now.
Okay.
But I think that, when everything with social media was really like at its peak, or really starting off with Facebook, I intentionally was like, I don't want to be involved. I don't want to compare myself to other people. I'm just going to stay focused and do what I have to do. But so I think, so I was like really like a rebel without a cause, whatever. But I think that because of that, it's like I'm kind of shy on social media because it's like new to me. Like I just got on Twitter maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And so, and I don't even have a Facebook account. So I think that whole idea of like promoting yourself online, or or just self-promotion in a way where it's not one-on-one. Like I could do the one-on-one, but I don't think that that's necessarily how you build your brand in this day and age. And so
no, it's terribly inefficient, number one.
Yeah.
And it's something that I talk a lot about too, because I meet so many people who are brilliant and we have these great conversations. And then I think, wow, it would have been great if someone else had heard it, which is why I wanted to do these podcast interviews, because when I'm coaching people one-on-one, a lot of times what we arrive at and learn and kind of figure out during our session could have been helpful if other people would have had the opportunity to hear it. So I thought that was interesting that you said you didn't want to start comparing yourself. And you knew that social media was a setup for that. And I think because of what you do, because of your, background and knowledge of how, like, you have an insight that most of us didn't have. We just jumped into it. Didn't know any better, right? But you're like, having access to everyone's.
I was a psychology major, so I was like, this might be healthy for me.
Exactly. So I love that. So quickly, I want to reframe self-promotion.
Okay.
And this is actually a reframe that I have to do often, unfortunately. Probably another podcast is coming about that. But what you were sharing with me a few minutes ago in terms of all of the knowledge you've amassed, the research you've done, what you've learned, like I'm listening to you talk about these juicy topics of how sexism and racism is affecting how we respond and show up in the world, and John Henryism and becoming type A, and that leading to like all of these interconnected things that are fascinating, but understanding how they work and may play against how you're operating in the world and play against the very goals that you're going after, how they're counteracting kind of your efforts by negatively impacting your health. I don't know about that, right? So, and I would probably be the perfect person to learn about some of these wellness strategies. And so, and I'm just hearing about it because we're here during doing this interview. But when you think about self-promotion, nothing you really said was about you. You're talking about what you've studied, learned, excavated, found through these years of study and research that could potentially help me and help, other women like me and our friends and our moms and our aunts. You're not saying, look at me, I'm Veronica, I'm so amazing.
Right.
I'm so smart and I've studied all of these things. You said, Black women tend to, and this creates this result. And I want to help them become more aware so they can potentially avoid that result. So how many women wouldn't want to hear that? That's not a message. That's not self-serving. That's service.
Hey.
Yes, that's service. But not just service. Like, think about, I've had my issues with health, right? And I'm still working on my health. It's a daily battle. And I think that really strikes me as that resonated, the John Henryism. I'm going to go look that up later. But the idea of straddling that line of being excellent, but also being loving to yourself, and how when you can't find that balance, you really are putting your health in jeopardy. And then, of course, as women, I'm immediately thinking about the people who depend on me. And so even if I'm not doing it just for me, I'm doing it for them. Like, I want to know, how can I approach this differently? So I think that's the first reframe. You've got to move beyond, it feels like self-promotion because suddenly it's like you're stepping out there and you're by yourself, right? And you mentioned kind of operating under the banner of a larger organization, having this university behind. I'm doing it on behalf of Howard University. I'm doing this on behalf of Northwestern University. But suddenly you're going to be stepping out there and you're not going to kind of have that to hide behind or lean on. And so that feels a little scary because you're a little exposed, right? You're naked.
Right.
But I suspect that your desire to reach women of color, or I'm sorry, Black women, is bigger than your fear of being exposed. Would you say that's accurate?
Yes.
Your desire to reach and help women who could potentially, let me make it a little more extreme.
Okay.
Women who could potentially face health challenges due to the stress of racism or due to a lack of awareness.
And mental health.
Yes. Like these are life-saving, it sounds like life-saving tools and strategies that you have, that you have inside of you that you're holding on to just because of this exposure piece.
It's the exposure piece, but it's also like sometimes like in certain settings, it's not necessarily like valued. It's like, no, keep on learning. No, keep on writing. No, if it's publish it in the research journal. But it's like deep down, I'm like, but wait a minute. Like some of the people who I want to get this information aren't getting it. And so I think it's a lot of things about like being in environments that are supportive of not just the research, but the platforms that you value or decide to use.
So I think that you're going to have to divorce that part of your professional identity from your mission. And I say that I've heard this kind of line of thinking before too. I've worked with a lot of people who were in academia, in research, in psychology. And that is, like you said, are you going pop culture now?
Right.
Like, are you,
you got the eyes, you got the feel now, right?
Right. And so I think that obviously you want to keep doing what you need to do to maintain your credentials and all of that, and maintain your role and meet the requirements of your job, obviously. But I think if you're looking for validation on the mission piece and on reaching out to women who may not be in these academic circles, you've got to let that go. Like it's not coming from academia, because they have a very specific idea of what your research should be doing and what you should do with it and who should be reading it and who should care about it. And I think that you have,
and also what's valued in terms of promotions,
right?
Like the money,
right? And so, I mean, you may have to balance, okay, how much time am I spending on the publishing that I've got to do to get to the next level here, but also how am I reaching out to women who need this work? So I would like to start then with, let's kind of outline what could be a strategy for you to begin to ease your way into becoming more visible. You mentioned once a year you write an op-ed.
I mean, I like to do it more frequently, but in the end, it's like, wow, this looks like I've just done it like once a year. That's
and
nothing.
Where do you typically send those?
So I've had like a friend who's been able to kind of like push it through her different organizations, but then like it'll end up getting picked up. And like one time it was picked up by Time magazine, or another time it was picked up by Quartz.
Very nice.
Thank you, girl. So that's, I definitely want to begin doing that a bit more often. And I have all these ideas, but it's like, okay, gotta write it.
Okay, so that means we need to make time for writing. That's number one.
Yes.
Can you carve out a 90-minute window?
90 minutes is feasible.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Once a week.
Yes.
Once a week to work on a new piece, to shape it up. And I want you to either take that piece and publish it on LinkedIn, or if you feel like it's a piece that could be just go all the way, send it to your friend and see if she can share it through her channels, so that it could potentially get out there. Now, you mentioned that Quartz and Time have picked up previous pieces. Is there a way for you to reach out to whoever managed that and kind of start to build a relationship, or re-energize that and I'm writing new things, let me know if you're looking for anything specific, let me know if I can send you some of the new things I'm working on.
Yes. Okay.
So I think if you've got all of these ideas, it sounds like if you could dedicate, let's say if you dedicated 90 minutes to the writing, and could we do 30 additional minutes for outreach and promotion? So that's a 2-hour block once a week.
In outreach and promotion, so that would be like reaching out to the liaison and saying like, oh, I have some new ideas. What do you think about it?
Exactly. So it would be a mix of actually trying to get it published or sent to someone who could place it for you, to sharing it on Twitter, on Facebook, and just kind of plugging it on LinkedIn so that people see it again. I know you have your website, and if you're cross-publishing from, and you have to be careful, like if you end up getting it published in a Time or Quartz, they all want the first publication, so it'll need to be unpublished elsewhere. But many times publications don't mind that if after you've published your piece with them, say, a week or two later, you can republish it on your site and say this first appeared in Time. But you have to ask to make sure what their rules are. But even if they don't allow you to do that, just make sure that you don't simply, publish the article and then that's it, right? So you have to keep, sending it out, tweeting it, sharing it on LinkedIn. So even if you get it published in Time, you don't just share it that one time, right? So they publish it, then you tweet it. And then the next day you share it on LinkedIn. And then maybe, a couple of days later, you share it with a new intro on LinkedIn for the people who didn't see it. So you have to kind of make some time to do that, though. And if you're kind of quarantining all of your promotion activities to that one window, you'll want to get a social media scheduling tool that can allow you to kind of pre-write some updates and schedule those in. Buffer is a great free one that you can use to schedule up to 10 updates. And then Hootsuite's good as well. There are lots. I'm sure you have one or know of ones you can use. But that is what I would essentially be using my 30 minutes to do, is to take what I'm writing and actually start promoting it. You also mentioned that you want to start speaking.
Yes.
So where have you started?
Yeah, so last week I was able to lead a workshop about mindfulness among breast cancer survivors and caregivers. So that was like one workshop. And then I've also had speaking moments at universities. And I think and some of them have been paid. So I'm trying to get more of the paid. But yeah, so those have been some of the settings.
So I would say that since you're actually in a great position because your audience is so specific. And so what I would do is I would research the type of organizations that cater to the women who fit the profile of needing this information. So number one, if you just want to do African-American women, you want to look at all the organizations that have members of professional African-American women. So obviously your sororities, big organizations like National Council of Negro Women. So all of those membership type organizations, but then also look at conferences that cater to or draw in that audience. I'm assuming, do you have an age range that you are targeting?
Initially, we're kind of doing 18 to 35, at least with the research. I think that the millennial piece is something that could be appealing, like kind of really getting to know, like, okay, what's this age group going through?
Right. So then you definitely want to get plugged into Blavity, because they're doing a lot with Black millennials, and they also allow for contributors on their site. So you might want to try publishing something with their audience just to grow your name with millennials. So I would say professional organizations and associations that cater to Black women generally, but then also industry specific. So there might be, Black accountants, Black doctors, Black lawyers. Find some of those high pressure occupations that we see a lot of burnout. We see a lot of stress. We see a lot of high achievers already gravitating towards those professions. So you want to find groups of them, right? So if what now?
I said we want all of them.
Right. So you want to reach out to them, and it may be locally at first to say, may I come present at your membership meeting? May I come present at your, midwinter retreat? And then you build relationships, and eventually the national organizations, people will hear about you. If you're good, which I'm sure you are, they're going to hear about you and the work that you're doing. And so they'll start to share your information internally, right? Like that's happened to me before, where I gave a presentation on personal branding to a local organization, and they loved it so much that they kind of pushed my name up to the national office to recommend me for their national convention and conference. So I would be thinking about the conferences and organizations that cater to your audience and begin to attend some of their meetings, get to know who's planning the conferences, follow the hashtags, but also get prepared with a succinct pitch that speaks directly to that audience, right? So what could you come in and present about in between 20 minutes to 60 minutes that could hit, several points on why this is important, what people need to know? Here are the 4 takeaways that your audience members are going to walk away with. And this is why you want to bring me in to give this talk. This is what this information is going to do for your members. So package that up. Like, you need a description of the presentation and the talk so that you can essentially sell it to the organizations who are going to be bringing you in. So I think that's a lot. That's a lot to do.
It is. You're great. Like, do you think I'm pigeonholing myself by not going the women of color route and kind of broadening out?
No, absolutely not. Actually, okay. I think that it is, obviously there's more women of color than there are Black women, but there are some very specific challenges that are unique to us.
Right.
And I think in terms of the organizations that cater to that specific audience, there is a lot to choose from. And I think you'll be more attractive the more specific you can be with your message. And I think that ultimately that's, when people talk about pigeonholing, is that where your heart is? Like, do you want to work with this big audience, or are you passionate about Black women, right? And if that's where your passion is, I say that's where your focus should be, because that's where you're going to be able to bring the most excellence to the table.
All right.
Okay. So you're going to set aside 2 hours starting this week to write and promote to start. And then you're also going to work on packaging your talk so that you're going to make a list of all these organizations and potential targets so that you can pitch them on this information. And I think that especially after you've written some stuff and you've got some more articles published, that's when I would start the outreach for speaking, because ultimately, if someone is considering you to speak, they're going to look at your body of work to see what they can find about you out there online. And so it'll be great to kind of have your articles published to show that, you are a thought leader, you're sharing your ideas, you've got new ideas, and they can see what you're about.
Okay.
So was this helpful?
This was great. Thank you, Amanda. Absolutely. I mean, I think I have about 12 different specific things that I can do. And you just started rattling those off like 15 minutes ago. So, wow. Thank you.
Yay. Well, I'm so glad this was helpful. And hopefully my goal for this session and the other sessions is that not only are you helped and do you have some direction, but the people who are listening to our conversation and watching our conversation, if this pertains to them or someone they know, they can kind of take pieces from the strategy that I gave you and use it to also kind of jumpstart their brands. So thank you for being a part of this. And for those of you who are listening and watching, thank you for listening and watching. If you want to learn more about me, you can visit AmandaMillerLittlejohn.com, packageyourgeniusacademy.com. And if you want to learn about my personal branding playbook, go to thebrandingbox.com. www.beneaththefaçade.com. And Veronica, do you want to share your link, your website one more time for those who...
Please, thank you. It's www.beneaththefaçade.org, and it's for Black women coping with gendered racism and stereotypical expectations in the workplace.
Excellent. And you can also find Veronica on LinkedIn.
Yep, I'm there.
All right. So thanks for joining us. We'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.